realtors who have had neighbors from What Happened. Story 1 in an apartment. This lady lived on the 3rd floor. She must have let her cat everywhere. BC, the entire building reeked like cat. The smell entered my apartment frequently. When I passed her in the hallway, I would have to hold my breath. BC, she smelled so bad. I dealt with this for 2 years with multiple complaints to the office until I eventually called animal control. Turns out she had 30 cats in her apartment. Edit, sorry for not responding. I got busy yesterday and didn't realize this blew up so much. The smell was so bad that on a windy day, people from other buildings within the complex could smell it. Sometimes it would smell like the cat was in my own apartment. Animal control took all of her cats away. She was evicted shortly after that. I know from talking to other neighbors that this had been going on for 5 years before I even moved in, but they had a hard time evicting her. BC, she was Section 8. Although I'm sure the apartment manager was very incompetent as well. She even told us that she had been working there for 6 years, and my neighbors were wrong that it had been going on the lawn. The maintenance guys had to put on masks and rip the carpet up and seal the under it, amongst many other things they had to do to make the apartment livable for other renters. Story 2, my neighbor has 3 dogs, which they let outside twice a day too. The dogs are friendly and not very loud, except they always on our lawn. My husband and I have actually seen our neighbors encourage their dogs to use our lawn. They physically lead the dogs to our lawn or discourage them from going on their lawn, etc. I finally had enough, so I got my garden trowel and flicked all their dogs onto their lawn. Today, my husband went outside to mow the lawn and caught the neighbor encouraging their dogs to go onto our lawn. The neighbor acted like nothing was wrong, but quickly called the dogs back. Ed, we did talk to the neighbors before about but they're not interested. It's been roughly a year since we moved here, and I can't wait to move out already. We want to build a fence, but we're in the middle of remodeling our bathroom. The house was built in the 70s and hasn't been maintained very well, so we can't really afford a fence right now. To all those saying that my husband should on their porch dormant lawn to get revenge, he's a shy pooper. He can't in front of me, let alone in the open with neighbors watching, but thanks for the input. Story 3, there's a particular type of person who seems to feel like they're the only thing standing between society and complete collapse. And about 6 years ago, my downstairs neighbor was one of them. She was aloof and paranoid, and she'd imagined threats from almost everywhere, which made the fact that she thought of herself as some kind of secret agent all the more annoying. Said neighbor was always trying to find ways of getting me and anyone else whom she thought of as suspicious to move out of the building. She'd stage loud telephone calls with headquarters about the alarming behavior of the other tenants, like my tendency to get home after 9 in the evening, which was clearly scandalous, and frequently yell at the people who'd stand on the corner to smoke. On one occasion, I heard her shouting at someone over the placement of a flower pot in their window, which was obviously an indication that they were selling drugs. Then, one afternoon, I found this taped to a wall in the stairwell. It was perhaps the most ridiculous attempt at an official document that I'd ever seen, and including the time that my friend Jonathan, then 9 years old, made a flyer for bodyguard services. The atrocious grammar, poorly photoshopped seal, and distinct absence of any legitimate contact information made the notice about as realistic as a scene from NCIS. Furthermore, the reference to the past 2 years seemed to indicate me as her primary target, since I was, as far as I knew, the only resident who had been there for less time than that. Still, since the notice was clearly meant to scare someone, I decided to return the favor by taking a page out of my neighbor's own playbook and standing outside of her apartment, while staging my own fake phone call. You should see the notice, it's terrible. Huh. Yeah, it's like they didn't know that impersonating a federal official is a felony. Anyway, the real FBI are on their way, and they're going to dust for fingerprints. Whoever made that notice is looking at a lot of jail time. I went back inside my apartment after that, and within seconds, I heard my neighbor's door open. There was the sound of hurried footsteps rushing towards a stairwell, followed by an equally hurried retreat. When I went out to check 5 minutes later, the notice was gone. I've since moved away from that location, but for the rest of the time that I lived there, the lady never bothered me again. TLDR, my idiotic neighbor liked to pretend that she was a secret agent. Story 4, when I was a kid, we lived across the street from shitty parents with even shittier teenage children. The sister brought random dudes home at least 2 to 3 times a week and was so loud that my parents called the cops on her once because they thought she was being attacked. Nope, she was just really loud when she was... Her brother had a lucrative business selling cocaine, and he always had customers hanging out in the driveway, waiting for him to show up with some more blow. His parents kept bragging about how well he was doing with his construction job because he bought them a new car and a boat. The sister babysat me once, but left after an hour because she had to go somebody. Her brother showed up to take over. I made him help organize all of my stuffed animals. I don't remember if he was high, but he organized the out of all of my toys, We left that neighborhood as soon as the drive-bys got more frequent. Edited to answer questions wholly. Didn't think this would get that many votes. We'll try to answer the questions. The drive-bys weren't entirely his fault. We were living south of Seattle in the early 90s, and there was a lot of gang activity in the neighborhood. We had to stop going to the playground because there were too many stray needles and bullet casings. We did get our house tag vandalized by the brothers' customers a few times. They must have either thought they were tagging his house or saw us watching deals and wanted to scare us. We never called the cops and were told not to say anything about the vandalism to anyone at school. As for my parents letting them watch me, they're good people, but were dealing with their own ill mothers at the time. Both of their moms had addictions and personality disorders. So taking care of them took up a lot of their energy. My parents grew up in pretty awful conditions. Mom was in a cult. Dad was in Benghazi. So having the neighbors babysit us wasn't the worst thing in the world, given their experiences. Story 5. My neighbors in the shitty apartment I moved to after I moved out of my parents' place were hoarders to the extreme, as well as alcoholics. We started getting roaches in our apartment about 2 months after they moved in. Then came mice, then came rats. About once a month, we'd call 911 on them because we'd find one of them passed out in the parking lot or on the doorstep or on the stairs. They came over and asked if it was us who kept calling 911. Then they cussed us out because they didn't have insurance and had to take out numerous payday loans to cover the ambulance costs. We broke our lease and moved out after someone took on our welcome mat. Story 6. I live on a farm, and we had one guy who was he was known to have definitely stolen sheep from us. In some cases, he had shorn the wool off them, sold it, and returned the sheep, and sometimes eating the sheep we suspect. He demanded that we front the bill to fix the fence despite it being between our two properties and refusing to split the costs. He also had someone else's bull jump into his property, use it to service his cattle for 2 years, and when the owner tracked it down, they demanded to be paid the adjustment costs or he wouldn't return it. He had a house on the property that he rented to his farmhand, and the farmhand found him in there one day, going through his things and telling him he wasn't allowed to leave the property under any circumstances while under his employ. The guy quit straight after that and wanted to work for us. Update, got a bonus shitty neighbor as well. We had another old neighbor who regularly would try and play chicken with us in his car, and once pointed a shotgun at my dad after my dad questioned why he sent his friends to hunt on our property. Update 2, for those wondering, I'm Australian. My dad didn't call the cops, and the games of chicken soon ended when he decided his shitty Volvo was a match for a 5-ton truck. My dad didn't budge, and the crazy old ran himself off the road. No damage done to either of them. Story 7. They tried to kill my dog because it was a death dog. She was a white lab and very sweet. We had a large fenced-in backyard. My dog wasn't terribly loud. She wasn't aggressive at all. She was just the size of a lab, and my neighbors, specifically the wife, thought that made her evil. They called the cops more than once saying my dog was terrorizing the neighborhood. The cops came, met the dog, and we explained that she was always in her yard. They left saying just make sure she stays in the yard. While neighbor called 2 more times to complain, and eventually they went and spoke with her about her ludicrous complaints. Here is when she started taking matters in her own hands. We noticed her dog was getting sick a lot, like really sick. We took her to the vet, and the vet said we needed to stop feeding her human food that could be bad for dogs. We had no clue what she was talking about. We went back home and decided to keep a closer eye on her. Turns out her neighbor had been dumping all manner of vile things over our fence, food scraps, mop water, and God knows what else. We went and spoke with her about this, and she denied it. Finally, we caught the on video and made sure she saw us recording her. Later that night, the husband comes over and apologizes for his wife and begs us not to call the cops. He promises he'll ensure our dog is left alone. We agreed, but said if anything happened to our dog again, we would press charges. Thankfully, she stopped coming after our dog. She moved on to our landscaping. She climbed over the fence more than once to trim reed hack and destroy our hedges and a few saplings. She even went and pulled all the flowers out of our flower bed that we had just planted. We went and spoke with her husband, as he was the more sane of the two. Same conversation as with our dog. There were more random things that we could never prove. Eventually, she fell very ill and passed. Her husband was like a different person, invited us over for barbecues and all. Eventually even got himself a little dog, TLDR, called cops, and then fed my pup food scrapes and cleaning supplies over a fence. Proceeded to destroy plants and her husband's life until she passed on. Edit. We were always a little suspicious that she was not all there may have suffered from some mental illness, which is one of the reasons we work with the husband and didn't press charges immediately. And I don't think husband killed wife. Even though she was a handful, he honestly loved her and seemed to genuinely grieve for her. I do believe there was some relief eventually, though, no longer having to babysit her constantly, etc. Story 8. I had a neighbor who would bring women back every weekend. Usually it was cool. Hear the bed squeak for 20 seconds. Stop, silence. Then laughing. I'm not the jealous type in any way, but when he constantly played shitty German house music at 4 in the morning, I started getting pissed. After talking to him about it, he essentially told me to off. So the next time it happened, I YouTube babies crying and put it on full blast through my speaker, which I had sat up against the wall. Needless to say, it stopped after that. Edit great. My highest comment is about how I blocked my neighbor, so I didn't have to listen to his shitty techno music at 4 in the morning. Story 9 came here to rant about my shitty neighbors. Read a few posts, and now I feel like sending them flowers. Edit great. My highest rated comment is about not making a comment. FML. Story 10 guy next door was a hoarder junk on front and back porch. Door that won't open and never cut his grass. After a couple years of city not enforcing lawn care, neighbors on either side started cutting front lawn for him. But we couldn't mow back for him because he always had 2 large dogs who only understood Polish. Grass was always 6 tall in backyard, and that plus trash meant the mosquitoes along the fence were horrendous, rendering our otherwise pleasant shade garden unusable after any rain. At one point, he was stealing our water, which drove up our water bill. We suspect he didn't have electric either. He hung out the library all day most days. Near the end, he slept in his truck in his driveway, sometimes, possibly to avoid going in his hoarding ruined house. Eventually, he died. He was very sick. His house is in probate. Now, someone mows every month or so. His son came and tried to clean out the house, but after dozens of truckloads to the dump, when the beer cans and fast food bags were still hip deep, I think he finally admitted defeat and quit coming out to clean every weekend. It will take a professional crew to clean it, I think. Thank goodness we are renters, not owners. Edit woke up to many points and many comments, trying to wade through them. Fortunately in bed sick, so maybe I will have time. Story 11, every time they threw a party, a TV would get thrown out a window or balcony. Not a flat screen, a tube TV. It would just fall from the heavens and explode, sounding like a car crash. It would just rain a 150 LV 36 tube TV from the sky. Happened 4 times in one semester. Edit TIL. Apparently, every single private housing company for every single university looks identical. I'm not surprised at all. Story 12, I live next door to a psychotic meth cook in the backwoods South that's a genius at evading cops' AMA. He does exciting things like ride an ATV up and down the street, shooting randomly in the air, shoot up with his buddies 10 feet from my son's bedroom window, wreck into my house, builds booby, trapped meth labs in the woods. Beats his girlfriend, his friends show up and pass out in my driveway. Random drugs show up in my mailbox all the time. Can't leave my house because he'll rob it. God, he's so much fun. Story 13, upstairs neighbors used to get drunk and off their balcony, jump up and down, and listen to classic rock at a really loud volume. My pops was fresh out the pen and didn't want to get into any trouble, so he politely talked to the husband. Things were okay for a while, and then one day the daughters came down and started throwing those little spiky that fall off the tree at my sisters and I. Their mom was laughing and encouraging them. My sisters beat the out of both of them, and then the mom decided she wanted to fight my sisters. They were like 12 and 15 at the time. Well, my mom is a straight-up lunatic when it comes to her family. When my mom got home, she went upstairs and started pounding on the door. The lady wasn't home, so my mom did the only logical thing left to do and snapped her broom. About 15 minutes later, this big came bumping her gums, and Ma Dukes was waiting for it. My mom is only 52, but she's about that action. Before she could get down the stairs, my mom hit her with a 2-piece, and the behemoth yelled for her husband. That was mistake number 3 for them. Her husband raised his fist to my mom, and my mom let go of his wife and started scrapping with him. My mom beat the out of him. My dad was walking in from work and sprung into action. He threw my mom off the dude and beat the out of him while still holding his coffee mug and jacket. About an hour later, the dude showed up with 2 of his biker buddies. My dad went out and beat the out of all of them. That family moved a week later, and my parents were the heroes of our apartment complex. Story 14, this isn't even everything that went down with that neighbor. Just some not-so-brief highlights. My mom had this neighbor who pretended to be weak from cancer chemo, so her landlord couldn't get mad at her for when trash bins were full and lawn was filthy. She even went as far as shaving her head and faking a limp, cane, and everything. Mom baked her some cookies and offered to take care of her bins and lawn. Neighbor spills about her scam. My mom, now enlightened about my neighbor's default and our star's bullshit and tired of the trash blowing into our yard, called the landlord. Neighbor wasn't happy and would blast music at ungodly hours of the night we morning to get back at my mom. Mom would get frustrated because she worked late and left early. Filed noise complaint to police. Police arrive. Neighbor claims my mom, old little Asian lady, punched her in the chest. Neighbor wants her arrested. Mom shows cops our security cam footage. No mom punching. Instead finds crazy neighbor kicking her 9-year-old daughter out in the middle of the night. 9 years old is banging on her door. My mom comes out to check on noise, tries to bring hysterical girl inside. It's like 2 a.m. Neighbor comes out and sprays her with a hose. Neighbor taken away. Daughter sent to live with dad. TLDR, neighbor faked cancer. Got arrested. Story 15, I live in an apartment. I pay my rent on time. I don't break a lot of. Sometimes I laugh a little loud with my sister or friends. But overall, I'm a good neighbor. This guy and his GF move in. She gets pregnant. They decide to get a dog. She decides that she doesn't want to walk or play with the dog, so she puts him out on the balcony all day. The dog barks all day. This went on for about 2 months. The city I live in has a noise ordinance, but the cops really don't enforce it much. Property manager said we've talked to him, and the dog isn't out much during the day. I was at my wits' end. I finally contacted the property owner. Told him I had been here for several years with no incident, and that the neighbors had a dog they kept on the balcony. So the smell of dog and was horrible, and I couldn't sit out on my balcony in peace. He got in contact with my property manager and told them to either evict them or move them away from me. Before they moved out, he got drunk and smacked her around. I called the cops on him. They took him in, but she refused to press charges. Not sure what happened to them after they got moved to another apartment. I used to be good friends with the girl next door from when we were 10 till HS started, even though she treated me like. Her parents were obviously alcoholics, so I felt sorry for her more than anything. My little brother came along with me over to her backyard one day, and he accidentally tripped and fell into their back porch door. Her mom, who had daily naps from all of her drinking, was woken up and stormed outside to scream at my little autistic brother that could barely speak. When he didn't respond, she burned him with a cigarette on his arm. Not as crazy as some of these other stories, but she still knowingly burnt a 6-year-old autistic kid. Edit, my mom did go over there, but made sure to yell at her. Where everyone could hear her was a weekend, so everyone was outside. The mom's husband was an attorney and knew it would be a better idea to embarrass her in front of the neighborhood than assault her. No expletive was left unsaid. And no one told my dad, because he would actually burn their house down with him in it. Story 16, I don't drive much because I bike most places, but this dude next door called the cops the first day I moved in because my car is too loud. The cops showed up and were total car guys. Ended up sitting in the driveway revving my car up because the cops thought my 06D was which it is. Story 17, my first apartment living away from home was in a small complex filled with retirees. My neighbor across the hallway was a man my ex and I nicknamed Mr. Fire. He'd glare at me all the time and complain whenever I was sitting outside. He hated my cat and always assumed I was a smoker. Young people and their cigarettes. You better not smoke around here. The lady down the hall from you is on oxygen and she can smell it. How he got his nickname? Once I was walking to the bus stop before class in X, and I saw a garbage can smoldering in front of our building. It wasn't flaming, but there was a hole burned through it, and the plastic around the hole was melting. It had been a dry spring, so we were worried it might start an actual fire. X ran inside to get the apartment manager who lived 1 floor under me. When she came outside with the maintenance guy who removed the can, she yelled at the neighbor's window, "Hey you, what's the deal here?" Apparently, this old man with beginning stages of dementia was cooking a steak in his kitchen. When the meat lit on fire, he didn't know what to do, so he threw the entire pan in the garbage. But then the can started melting, so he thought it'd be a good idea to throw the whole thing out the window onto a garden full of chips. He was eventually taken away to a retirement home after flushing his diapers down the toilet, bursting a pipe, and flooding the laundry room. Story 18, he told his 12-year-old son to take care of the new neighbor's cats because they ventured into their yard a few times. In-story warning, in CFL, 1 cat was shot over a dozen times with pellet gun, and the other was stabbed in the cheek so much that you could see its jaw and teeth. Both cats survived the attack, but ended up dying 2 weeks later in spite of all the medical care. Story 19, I have super religious neighbors. They hang signs for the local church camp on their property ECT. They kept putting our garbage cans in our driveway. While it was stupid and annoying, it became more and more aggressive. They would trespass on my property and do damage to my house, but I could never catch them in the act. So I did the only thing a sane person would do. I put on my velvet ritual cloak and made a show of putting a salt circle around my property, chanting and carrying on. Never bother me again. Story 20, this is a story about how local government can actually work for you. I live across the street from some major cons. For some reason, where my house ends is also the end of the residential zone. Directly across is zone for business. The who owns that business actually advertising on his website that he's a baron and his wife is a baroness. I like to call him Baron Vaughn. Will lease some of his property to some fat asses who sell shitty low-carb food. They'd been there for a couple of years when suddenly this massive food storage unit that looked like a train car appeared on their lot. And it was loud, very loud, and it ran 247 During the day with all the other noises, it wasn't so bad. But at night, it was the worst. Just about every 20 minutes this contraption would start up. I first went directly to and complained. He directed me to the fat who owns the low car place. This guy couldn't give to, I called the city. An inspector came out and did some testing. His results was that it wasn't actually loud enough for them to get into trouble. He did say he would check on their permits, though. Nothing ever came about that, so a long time goes by. Every night I seethe with anger and try to figure out ways to blow up this contraption or their place of business without being caught. I couldn't actually come up with anything. Then they have the audacity to start marking parking places on the street and putting up signs that said they would tow, not just during business hours, but all the time, whether they were there or not. I knew that this was illegal as the signs had no penal codes on them, etc. I asked around to people I knew, including cops, and was told I should contact my local city council member. I had never done this before. Supposedly politicians are there for their constituents, but I didn't actually believe it. I called, they were friendly, I explained the situation, and for good measure I also mentioned the cold storage unit. They looked into it. Suddenly the tow signs were gone. They then let me know that there was going to be a hearing about the cold storage unit. Baron Vaughn had already been fined and hadn't paid those fines, and if he didn't remove the thing, a lien was to be placed on his property. I was ecstatic. Could the end be near? And then one day, a large towing-type vehicle came and yanked that piece of storage unit out of there. I now have peace and quiet again. I might have the best city council member in the United States. He's getting my vote for every election in the future. TLDR, putting a giant cold storage unit across the street. My local assemblyman saved the day. Edit, due to the lack of research into my own story and it being late at night and also feeling constipated, I put down the wrong government-type title. Not assemblyman, but city councilman. We had one house on my old street growing up, which had just changed owners, seemingly nice couple, and their kids move in, and they're okay at first. Kids were kind of annoying, but they were like 6 and 9, so the rest of us on the block ignored it. We were all between the ages of 13 to 16. The kids began screaming profanities at us and throwing stuff. We just started avoiding them because they were nuts, so they told their mom that we were being mean. We then learned that she was crazy and would ride her bike up and down the street telling parents what their children had done wrong to their boys, mostly lies, but some truth. None of the parents would take her serious, and she was told off many times. We had an empty lot on the street where we would dig tunnels and build paintball fields. Every single morning we would find everything destroyed on the field. We find suspicious attempts at traps made and all kinds of boards with nails laid behind my neighbor's tires, and I'm certain a mom was sending her kids out on missions to get back at us and the parents. The unprovable damage went on for about a year. Peace returned when she moved, and then we all grew up. Story 21, he stalked my roommate and I. From the get-go, day one when he first moved in, and we met him, both of us had super bad vibes. No reason for it at the time, but our gut feeling said he was no good. And then literally for over an entire year, almost every time we went out the door, he'd come out to our house to try to hang out. We couldn't even walk across the road to check our mail in peace. Then he'd walk up the road and stand in front of our house staring, or pace in front of it in the road. Then he started knocking on our door in the middle of the night. We never answered as we in no way wanted him in our house ever, but especially not at midnight. And only knew it was him because we confronted him later and he admitted it. We'd go out together and get home and he'd be sitting in a chair in our yard like it was his house. And then he started showing up at stores and other places we were at in town and try to follow us around there. It was ridiculous, and we went through this for over a year. Got to the point that we hated even going outside and couldn't hang out in our own yard because we just felt like we were being watched and we're just counting down the seconds until he popped up. Because he always popped up, complained to our landlord multiple times. He warned our neighbor multiple times, and it still continued, and probably would still be continuing even now if the dude hadn't gotten behind his rent and been kicked out, which happened late last year. He upped the house he was renting so much that it's been getting renovated for months. There were holes in the walls, the floors torn up, and according to the landlord, like hundreds of empty liquor bottles, burnt foil, used needles, and all sorts of up in the house. And we're supposed to be getting our next neighbor moving in sometime soon, and we're just dreading it so much. This guy was the worst, but previous to him, we also had just a string of neighbors. We've both agreed that if this next one turns out to be just as shitty or worse, we're moving somewhere else. Story 22 was living next to a foster home that had tons of boys living in it. Found out my mom had allergies to our cats Rat and Trixie. So we let them outside, and everything was fine for like 6 months. I'd go outside every morning, call their names and feed them, and spend some time with them before heading off to school. Then one day my cat Rat doesn't show up after calling for her, but Trixie does. I don't think too much of it. She's probably out doing cat things. I go to my aunt's house for the weekend to study with my cousin, come back home, and still no sign of Rat. I start calling her name around the neighborhood and asking around if anyone's seen her. Nope, no sign of her. Meanwhile, Trixie is suffering from seizures all of a sudden. We get them under controlish and keep her inside to keep an eye on her because she was still like lethargic. Flash forward about 2 weeks later, I had basically got the thought maybe someone either ran Rat over or took a liking to her and kept her for themselves as she was a super smart and lovable cat. Cue knock on the door. My dad opens the door to a young boy holding a plastic bag with, you guessed it, Rat inside of it. He said she was in their hedges, and he had a feeling he knew what happened to her. They had gotten a new foster kid who he said wasn't right in the head and had a gut feeling he had something to do with it. My dad thanks the kid, but goes over and talks to the head of the house about it, because he also had noticed someone accidentally threw a fish over the fence a few days before and our dogs were almost going to go for it. Apparently, that kid had been causing a lot of trouble for them and was known to poison animals. Sad to say, Trixie didn't make it out okay either. Kid, the woman who had my old apartment before me, used to feed all the neighborhood skunks, causing them to constantly hang around my dimly lit apartment building. My then boyfriend used to have to carry a flashlight to avoid startling one and getting a face full of stink. Story 23. Back when I was a little kid, my next door neighbors did hard drugs and were always loud and had women over. One day they got raided by the SWAT, and as it turns out, the squad leader was my hockey teammate's dad. He chuckled when he saw me through the window and chatted with my dad for a few. Was pretty cool to watch and see their guns and suits. 1010 will remember for the rest of my life. Story 24. She was just nuts. We built our houses around the same time. I was 10 to 12 in this situation, and it started out okay. Her husband and kids were awesome. Then things started to go wrong. It started with the fence. They wanted the paneling on their side. We said whatever, having the supports or whatever on our side meant that my siblings and I could climb the fence. They wanted a more expensive fence, whatever. We came in under budget with the house. They wanted the fence moved 1 meter onto our property. No way. Man, did we pay for that. It only happened when Mom and us were home. But what would happen is just little to start with, like getting pebbles thrown over the fence when Mom was in the garden, or Shed knock on the fence and pretend it wasn't her. It started escalating when Shed yell abuse at us. Everyone but my then stepdad, who of course didn't believe us. When we came home from school, would have to wait for the garage door to close fully before we could get out of the car, or Shed be out the front of our house screaming at us, holding a broom or a rake. She was nuts. Finally, my stepdad caught her when she was poking a hole in the fence, so she could watch us, and was whispering abuse through the fence. Thinking he was Mom, she shat herself when he smacked the fence right over where she was making a hole. We got out of that house quick, which sucked because that was the house of her dreams. There was also missing pot plants, mysteriously pulled out plants, fronds missing from palm trees, and we could only guess how she ended up with a brand new palm tree. Story 25. When I was a kid, our neighbor built this giant deck on his house that actually went over our fence. We ended up having to go to the city to force him to make it smaller. We went to a family reunion shortly after, and when we came back, he had a sign on his fence facing our front door that said, "Peekaboo, I see you Sparados," and he had set up a bunch of security cameras on his house that all were aimed at our house. We pretty much just avoided him from then on until my parents divorced and sold that house. Story 26 had this dude next door. Our bedrooms shared the same wall. He had this subwoofer that was louder than the horn of Hammerhand. Guy would listen to strictly heavy beats. I hope he's in a ditch somewhere, naked with no other earthly possessions except for that subwoofer. Story 27, a lady moved in and lied that her dog was a service dog because these apartments did not allow dogs or cats, but can't deny a service animal. This dog was no service dog. It didn't even have basic obedience training, and she would turn it loose all day long in the communal gated courtyard. Never cleaned up after it. And it was annoying because it would playfully chase everyone and harass everyone because it was starved for attention. She got tons of complaints, but because she kept claiming it was a service animal, there was nothing to be done. She eventually got evicted after getting second dog. She let run feral and everywhere too, which she never cleaned because obviously no one has two service animals that are literally never inside with the person. Landlord found out when she left she was also one of those hoarder people and left her apartment packed full of all kinds of filth, including bags of clothes she had been stealing at night from those charity donation bins they set up in parking lots. She was just a vile individual.